Hello, welcome back everybody to the next episode of You're Better Than That with me, Hannah Miller, and my friend Zoe.
Hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Good. So this episode, Zoe, is all stemming from a question or a problem that I get asked over and over and over again. When I go and do workshops, this is probably the biggest sticking point with people. So if I explain the sticking point and then we can dig into the concept. So when I work with people and their teams, we look at personality, we look at different personality types. We spend a lot of time saying to people, you need to play to your strengths, you need to be more of who you are, you need to build a team of difference. The problem is that some people look at their strengths, a lot of people look at their strengths and they see that they're great strengths and they like them, but they have an issue that they don't have what they might call naturally influential strengths. And a lot of these people are leaders and they start to panic, or they look at the team profile and they say, but the team isn't very influential. We can't influence anybody. I can't influence anybody. So this session today is about how do we influence, how do we have impact, how do we lead, even if we don't have what we might call those immediate impact strengths.
What would you say those immediate impact strengths look like?
Yeah.
Or are?
So in terms of, in the world of Clifton strengths, some of those immediate impact strengths are the orange ones. They're the influencing strengths. So that includes competition, communication, woo, maximizer, command, self-assurance, significance, all of those ones. Those strengths are about perhaps an influencing towards greatness or an influencing towards a certain story and message or an influence towards your specific conviction. The challenge is not everybody has those strengths and a lot of them are quite rare actually. So the first thing I say to people is it's more unusual to have loads of those strengths than it is to not have them. So often people look at them and they think these are the holy grail of strengths if I want to be a CEO or an MD or a leader in any environment or have a level of leadership. But there's no evidence to suggest that. These strengths simply mean that they might have more of that immediate impact or weight about them, which means that they can have that kind of instantaneous impact on the people around them and themselves. But I go to great pains to try to explain to people that there's more than one way to influence. And actually, that's what we're going to talk about today. But this is a common issue of being really concerned. We don't have influence. I don't have influence. I don't know how to get people to follow me. And I thought it'd be good for us to talk about that a little bit and some kind of suggestions as to how we can do that differently. The naturally influential strengths, if we stick with that for a moment, I've explained what they all are. If you know Clifton strengths, that will make sense. And if it doesn't, get in touch with me. We can talk about it some more. But if you think about a person such as Richard Branson, for example, Richard Branson is the founder of Virgin. The brand has been built more around him than anything else. He's a charismatic kind of character. He would have definitely some of those orange strengths in abundance. He's what you might call that naturally influential person that galvanized people around a vision, around a story, around an idea, around a conviction. But that is one way of leading an organization or leading a team and not the only one. Gallup did some research into this because they've obviously noticed as well that this is a bit of a problem to people and people say, I'm not a leader or I can't influence. So they gathered all the data they had on all the people who had positions of leadership and they looked in more detail at their strengths to see if there was a correlation between senior leadership and having these strengths. And essentially, they found that there wasn't. They found that you could be a successful leader and you could have any type of strengths, any type of personality. But what they did find is that the people who were successful leaders knew who they knew what they were and what they were not. They knew the strengths of the people around them and they played to those strengths. And they built a team that was effectively working all the time to play into those strengths. So in the context of even just you and I, Zoe, I know what my strengths are. I want to use those as much as possible. I know what your strengths are. They're different to mine. And I want you to be using those as much as possible. And that is the kind of recipe for happy, productive, effective teams, rather than a cookie cutter of this is what influence and leadership looks like. And actually, I think there's a real caveat here that we can read about leadership and read loads of great books and stories, but you have to remember somebody's personality is rooted in their story, and there's more than one way to do it well.
Would you ever say that there was a collection of strengths or a personality type that you would advise not to lead? Like, do you think there's such thing as people not being able to lead, or do you think we're all able to? It's just finding how you do it with your personality.
Well, that's a really good point. I think if there are some people who take on leadership positions and they don't want to do what comes with it. So there is a people element of leadership. So if you've taken on leadership because you want the kudos of a more senior position, or you want the pay or the accolade or the responsibility, you have to recognise that what comes with that is people, because people don't follow titles, they follow people. So the only people I would advise not to do leadership are those that aren't willing to do the heavy lifting of the people side. You can probably cover off everything else and learn strategies around everything else, or get the right people around you. The only way you can lead effectively and not like people is essentially, or not want to be around people, is to have a second in command who's going to do that for you. And you stick to the kind of leadership that you bring. So you could perhaps bring thought leadership, you could bring vision, and you then have to, again, mitigate for that by having others around you. I think that's probably the main thing I would say. What Gallup also did when they did this research into types of leaders and finding that you could be any kind of personality, they also looked at what followers actually want from their leaders. And they came up with 4 words, which I'll quickly go through. They did something like 30,000 conversations with followers to look into what it is that a follower wants from their leader. We spend so much time asking leaders about leadership. Why don't we ask followers what they want from leaders? And so they got down to these 4 really interesting words. The first is trust. The first universal expectation of a leader is that they are trustworthy. Can you trust them? Somebody once said, I think it was the guy who was the CEO of Best Buy, which is a really big American brand, that trust is the universal currency of the workplace. It's actually the universal currency of anywhere, any relationship. And that if you trust your leader and your leader trusts you, you have got the perfect foundation for everything else. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're a leader, the biggest and most important question to ask is, am I trustworthy, and do I demonstrate trust to my team? Am I, building trust into how I work with them? Am I vulnerable with them appropriately? Am I giving delegation away to them so that they grow? Do we share things together? Do I let them into the decision making? Because that's how you build trust. And I think when you know your personality, you can ask yourself, how well do I build trust, and what helps me lead in a trustworthy way? So the first one is trust. And I think, you and I would both have our own stories of this, of leaders who've broken trust. It's the most damaging of anything. It's more damaging than a bad idea, isn't it? Or I didn't quite execute a plan, or I forgot your birthday. When a leader is no longer trustworthy, you have nothing to go on. I mean, how's it felt for you when you've been in that situation?
It's really damaging. And I think it can also then alter your view of other leaders because of triggers and certain things done to you. And so I totally relate to that.
I remember once, when I was at work in a previous job, I had some senior leader colleagues who were my peers. And we were talking about something where a decision had to be made. And I can't remember all the ins and outs, but we'd come to a decision, we talked about it. And I went out the room of our shared office, and then I went back into the room. And when I went back in, they didn't know I'd walked in, and they were on the phone to our boss talking about me. I know. If you didn't pick that up on the podcast, there was a sharp intake of breath from Zoe. It was a moment of redefining of our relationship with each other, because they were caught out. essentially. And I just thought, I don't trust you. And you have done something that has broken trust. And to be honest, the writing was on the wall at that point. We're coming to an end. This isn't going to work. If we aren't for one another, how can we build anything together? So I think that's more important than any personality. You can be as snazzy and as charismatic as you like, but if nobody trusts you, it's short term.
Absolutely.
The second one is hope. So we've got trust and then we've got hope. Hope is all about vision, but it's more than just vision. It's about belief. It's about, I really think we can do this. We can weather the storm. We'll come out the other side. We needed leaders who demonstrated hope, didn't we, throughout the pandemic? We didn't need someone to tell us constantly that this was going to be awful and we were never going to get it through. It's the reason why people did the things they did, where they banged their kitchen utensils on the road and clapped. And we needed something that kept this sense of hopefulness and belief we'd come out the other end. And leaders need to demonstrate hope in their people and hope in the long-term vision, even when you are facing immediate challenges that might not look like that. I often use the analogy in workshops of being on an aeroplane and hitting turbulence, and you don't want your pilot to come on and go, guys, never experienced anything like this. This is hideous and we're probably going to die. That is not what you're looking for from your leader. If your leader's nervous, you actually want them to just talk to their co-pilot and not the entire people on the plane, and to come up with a plan and to give hope and say we can get through this. My niece was recently in a major storm. She's living at the moment on a ship. She's involved with a charity that travels around. It's like a large cruise ship. And they had the worst storm they'd ever had in about 18 years. And the pilot, not the pilot, what they're called? Captain. The captain was amazing. He spoke over the tannoy and he spoke hope to everybody they were actually petrified. And that's what you need a leader to do, is to be hopeful. So we've got trust and hope, again, universally available, whether you are a thinker or a doer or a relationship builder. And we've got compassion. This is another really important one because people often confuse compassion with emotion and feelings, and it's not the same thing. So you can care about someone, but it doesn't have to move you to tears. You can care about someone and you don't have to feel anything in your body. That is empathy. And some of us do have deep empathy, which can also be a challenge. I feel things much more than I'd like to. But leaders need to demonstrate compassion, which is care. It is a doing word. It means that when somebody is struggling, you will do something. You will find the right help. You will find the right colleague. You will facilitate what they need. And leaders want compassion. And I think compassion in moments of challenge also creates like a faithful team that are going to stick with you. They'll remember the things you did for them and the way you supported them, and it will return dividends. But again, compassion mustn't be confused with this idea of, I need to sit with you in this pain and be, you're not necessarily a naturally pastoral person to be compassionate. You can just simply say, I can see this is a big deal for you and we're going to give you the help that you need. It's as simple as that. So please don't confuse the two. It's universally available. And the last one is stability. Probably of the four, this is the one I think for me is the hardest. Stability is about being somebody who's in it for the long haul, who you are every day, showing up and being consistent, giving people that sense of security, commitment, long-term rather than somebody who comes in for 5 minutes and they're going to go again. Trying to bring safety, trying to bring stability to the ship, trying to help people see that you are not just trying to make decisions for the now, but also for the long run. Again, if we think about, without getting into a party political statement, if we just think about the state of the way people feel about the government at the moment, whoever you want to vote for, you could argue that those characteristics are so missing in public life at the moment, which is why people feel so lost at sea. We don't trust. There isn't a sense of hope. There's been no stability. And you could argue very little compassion has been demonstrated. And so these universal aspects, I would encourage anyone listening, if you want to have influence, find your way to demonstrate those to the people around you. Do it your way, but find ways to do it. I think that sort of knowledge from Gallup has been transformative in the way I talk to people about seeing actually you can have influence, but you need to do it your way. I think the other thing that I think is really important is I've read in like business journals or whatever that they call it target assessment. I've never heard this phrase before, and I don't really like the phrase. I think it sounds a bit manipulative. But essentially, it's about the idea of focusing on the person in front of you. So to be an influential leader, you figure out who you're leading and you figure out what their needs are, you figure out what their strengths are, and you as the leader chameleon into what they need. So I think there's a mistake to think that everyone should do what a leader, in the way a leader wants it to be done. I think leaders have to consider their people and give them what they need. So even just you and Laura as my direct team, you need different things from me. And so as a leader, I need to consider, right, what is it that Laura needs to thrive? What does Zoe need to thrive? And figure that out. I've got your strengths and our relationship to help me do that. But I think that focus on the person you're leading is so much more freeing than thinking, I've got to be everything and all things to all people. It's more, who are you and what is it that you need? Again, when I work with a team, I get people to talk about what is it that they bring and therefore what is it that they need, and ask leaders to listen. You know, if your team is saying they need time to think, or your team is saying they need relationship connection, or your team is saying they like to be involved in brainstorming, we need to give them what they need so that they can thrive.
Totally.
It's as simple as that. And whatever you think, it's not simple actually, it's very, very difficult. It's really hard and takes hard work. But a really good example of this, whatever you think about this guy, and I know people are listening go, ooh, because not everyone likes him, is Alex Ferguson, who is the ex-Man United manager. Having read about him, I think he's a very, very good example of figuring out the person in front of him. He always remembered things about the individual lads that he was training. He remembered details about their life. He figured out their individual motivations and he used it to the advantage of the team. If you listen to what any of them would say about him, he remembered their grandparents, he remembered the things that they liked to wear, to eat, to do, and he would gather that intel so that each person felt known and seen and heard. And I think I'd encourage any leader who wants to influence to remember the person in front of them, to get to know them, find out what motivates them, and try to do your best to provide those kind of conditions for them to thrive. There's a point, before I come on to my kind of final point on this, a wider point is, when does influence become manipulation? You know, when is, even what I've just said, is that manipulative or is it influence?
Yeah.
I mean, my thought on that, and it'd be interesting to know your thought because I'll give you a moment to think about it, but I think it depends on your underlying motivation.
Yeah.
What is it that is it because you want to get your way? Is it because you have a collective goal? So in the case of Alex Ferguson, there was a collective goal to win. That was his job. That was not a wrong thing for him to want. We shouldn't want to win at all expense, but that literally was his job. So if the collective goal, and they all want that as players to win, it's not manipulative to create the right environment for them to win. But if my agenda is I just want to steamroller something through, or I want to have my way, you could argue that's manipulative rather than influence.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's underlying motive, and I think of bad leaders that I've been in contact with, and how it would be used, information would be used to then exploit people almost. But like what you said, is there a common goal? Is it is everyone's winning here? It's a shared action that we're going towards. It's not in the best interest of the leader alone, but everybody as well.
Everybody.
And it's fair and equal.
And doesn't that actually come back to a bigger point on all this, that in my opinion, character trumps everything.
Yes.
And if there isn't the character underlying any personality type, we're going to fall into some kind of manipulative, controlling, leader type behaviour. And I'm kind of making an assumption that the people listening to this podcast are working on their character. You know, I want to be a better me, not just because I'm using my strengths, but also because I want to make better, more just really good choices with who I am and how I'm maturing as a person. But if there is no character underneath any strength, it's going to come out in a way that's toxic, manipulative, controlling, potentially people-pleasing, all kinds of different versions of that. But when your character's strong, you can handle the rest. And then maybe it means that if your character's in a good place, you're not going to be manipulating. You're going to be trying to influence towards a collective goal, which is the role of a leader to help that happen. The last thing I kind of wanted to say was that there are 4 areas of leadership, 4 types of strengths and types of personalities that can all lead. We've talked about the one already, which is the influencing type. And we've kind of covered off that some people have that natural charisma. They have that natural magnetism about them, which means that they can carry that kudos and gravitas around people. But there are 3 other types of leaders which are also really necessary and important. And if you are one of these, you've got to play to these strengths. You can have the strategic thinking kind of leader. I'm not one of those. But there are people out there that have become incredible leaders because they are thought leaders. They are experts in their field, or they're innovative, or their name has been known because of the legacy of their creativity. So, for example, you could put people like James Dyson, who invented the Dyson, in that category. He led through innovation. Or the senior team at Apple are definitely in the strategic thinking, the likes of Steve Jobs and others. That strategic thinking would have been their key leadership trait. You could argue there was some really big missing traits, actually, but that was the thing that drove the futuristic focus. Professor Whitty, who was one of the guys who helped us through the pandemic. If you remember, Boris Johnson used to have 2 professors either side. There was Van Tam and then there was Professor Whitty. And Van Tam was more of your relationship building and influencing type man. And Professor Whitty was your strategic thinking, executing type leader. So it was quite interesting. They covered off all that kind of leadership across those 2 on the outside. We'll leave Boris for another day. But that strategic thinking leader, often people trust them because they have a track record of knowledge, of innovation, of creativity, of thinking outside the box, of being able to understand the future. So you might be one of those kind of leaders. Then you've got the executing leaders. Those are leaders who have earned their stripes, essentially. They've worked really, really hard. People might say Serena Williams as a sportswoman was like that. She actually, if I remember correctly, she wasn't showing as much natural talent as Venus. She worked her guts out. So the work rate has given a sense of leadership. Margaret Thatcher, the story around her, again, you don't have to agree with her politics, but the story around her was that she just worked so hard to get there. She hardly slept. It was all about, I've done what I said I would do. I would work hard. And you set this trust in you because you have delivered. So executing leaders, people trust because they work hard and they deliver and they do what they said they were going to do. Cristiano Ronaldo is another one of those. He worked harder than everybody else, and that got him to where he has. And people respect that work rate and then try to replicate it in their own followership of you. So we've got our influencing leaders, we've got our strategic thinking leaders, we've got our executing leaders, and we've got our relationship building leaders. So these are your people leaders. They lead because of the emphasis on people. Jacinda Ardern, who was the New Zealand Prime Minister or President, I'm not sure I think it's Prime Minister, she said, "I refuse to believe you cannot be both compassionate and strong." And so her whole agenda was to lead through people, to actually get alongside people's hearts as well as their minds. There's loads of examples of relational leaders, and again, it goes back to my earlier point that people follow people, they don't follow titles. And relationship leaders put their efforts into the currency of relationships they have. So because of what that leader has done for them, or how they've looked after them or shown care to them, it is reciprocated in followership because of that sort of investment in them. And again, if you're listening to this list, you're going to be a combination of these things. But if you're honest with yourself, there's probably a couple of areas that you particularly lean into. Mine are definitely the relationship building and the influencing. That's my two. But I know just as effective leaders who lean into that thinking and executing. But then again, go back to my original point, they know who they are, they know what they do well, and they lead from that place and build the right team around them of other leaders. We can't be all things to all people, but we can recognize what our strengths are, play to those, and influence and lead from that place. There's one last quote I want to give before we finish, because I'm aware that I've just talked for a while. I think sometimes people think that you have to be an extrovert to be a leader, and you've got to be somebody who's got loads and loads of people energy. But actually, this is a really interesting quote here. Tim Elmore says that sociologists tell us that the most introverted of people will influence 10,000 others in an average lifetime. So if you're listening to this and you are on the more introverted side of life, you will influence at least 10,000 other people. Now, some more extroverted people might influence 20,000 others or 40,000, but we are all influencing directly and indirectly the people around us. What our job is to work out how we do that best, to capitalise and to grow and to develop that, then figure out the person who we're trying to lead and ensure that they are getting what they need in order to really flourish. Final point, engagement in the workplace, happiness in the workplace. One of the key measures is this question: somebody at work cares about me as a person. We need leaders who are interested in us as people, and we will ignore that at our peril. So I'd encourage you to find ways of connecting. Do it in a way that's authentic to you. Do it one by one if that's more appropriate. Do it as a group if that's more appropriate. But make sure you are investing in people, because as you invest in them, it will pay dividends and you will get the best reward on your investment.